Well, hi everybody, it's another Conversations with. I'm Dick Vaughn, and I am delighted today to have with me John Kingston. And John is a candidate for the United States Senate. I've been getting these little brochures in the mail, and I have to say this. John is a husband, a father, and a businessman, and he's got a great family, and he's been very successful. And I have to ask you, why do you want to give all that up to be a United States Senator? Those guys just fight and argue with each other. They get nothing done, you know. And I'm going to tell you something. If you look at the ratings, the Congress of the United States comes below lawyers, the telephone company, and insurance people.
You're just right. You're just right. You look at the popularity ratings, you look at the approval ratings, it's shocking how low it is.
Yep.
But we all know why. It's because Washington's broken.
Oh.
And I am in this race for 3 words: fixing broken Washington, right? And I believe that the problems we have as a country are solvable. They're solvable, though, with solutions that aren't Democratic solutions, nor necessarily Republican solutions, but they're American solutions. And that we just need to choose to work together, to achieve that. But you and I know that there are, people that are dividing us, every day on purpose. And one of those is my opponent in this race, Senator Warren. She's the divider-in-chief of the Senate of the United States. She's the most divisive figure in the ballot in this entire country this year. And I'm just so excited about the race against her. I mean, she leads only on things like class warfare and identity politics and political correctness. That's not what works out here in Charlton. It's what works for the Cambridge elites, but that doesn't work here. And bottom line is, I want power back to the people. I want the people to have the chance to be united and find, what we know in this great country, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right here in great places like Charlton.
Well, the thing that's interesting, I had the great opportunity when I had one of my radio stations, and it was sort of tongue-in-cheek. But in 1976, which was the bicentennial, I ran for president. And I announced my candidacy for president. And one of the main parts of my candidacy, and my slogan was, because there is a better way. Mm-hmm. And I said that if Delta is ready when you are, then they would be ready when the president is. Instead of flying around in that $1 million every time it goes up and down, I could if I had to go to Boston, jump on the plane, and if I didn't tell anybody I was coming, I didn't even need the Social Security. I get on the plane and go. Nobody would even know it was me. Saved millions. Anyway, the biggest thing I was in favor of...
Did you win on that?
No, I got 9 votes. Well, I found out that the ins don't want the outs in, and the ins protect the ins, and that they're really all buddies, even though they yell at each other, and they protect each other. And by that, what I really mean is, if I ran as a Democrat or Republican back then, I would need 3,700 signatures to get on the ballot. But if I ran as anything but either one of those two, and I ran on the bicentennial ticket, I needed 37,000 signatures.
The rules are set up.
Yeah, they don't want you in, no.
I mean, even though here in Massachusetts now, you've got 10% of the population is Republican, give or take, and 30% are Democrat. 60% are independents.
That's right.
But somehow or other, the system's not.
But the interesting thing is that the Democratic, my father has long since died, but if my father was alive today, in fact, he and my mother, when I turned 18, took me to vote, to make sure I went and voted. And those days are gone. But in any event...
What did your mom and dad do, by the way?
Well, my father served in both World Wars. He was in France in World War I, in the 26th Yankee Division. He lied about his age to go.
And how old was he when he went?
17.
My goodness.
And then in the Second World War, he went back in as a commander in the Navy, and he had an intriguing job. He went to MIT, was electrical engineer by trade, owned some businesses, a retail place for... In fact, we used to have a percolator before anybody else did. He used to have the Lionel franchise in Boston for trains. This is back in the 30s and 40s. But anyway, 41 he went away. I didn't see him for 5.5 years. But he ended up in Newfoundland. And he sat in a turret because he could do radar. And Hitler was sending subs over. And they went up through the North Pole and come down. And they were trying to get to the Portland Naval Yard and then go down to Boston, to Portsmouth, and get the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, and then ultimately to Boston. Mm-hmm. And my father used to sit in this turret, and he picked off 23 of them. We had destroyers out in the water. Wow. And when they'd go by Newfoundland, he was in Newfoundland.
I've never heard this story.
When he was St. St.
Never
John's,
the story
Newfoundland.
I've never heard the story of that particular
It was the North Atlantic,
perimeter.
It was called the North Atlantic Patrol. He was a part of that. And after the war, when the war ended, Admiral Radford was the head of that fleet, became the head of the Navy Yard in Boston, Boston Naval Shipyard. And at that time, they were converting all the warships from the old, really primitive radar to the new scanners, the spinners. And he asked my father, so my father became chief civilian engineer at the Navy Yard in Boston and did all the conversions of the ships.
My goodness.
But in any event, the Democratic Party that he knew, he would fall over today.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not even near it.
Absolutely.
And even the Republican Party, you go back to the John Volpes of the world, and back in the Bob Bradfords and Leverett Saltonstall, for instance, they would fall over if they saw what the party has become. So, but I was going to get back to the campaign, my campaign. One of the things that I pushed for, and it was my main thrust, was term limits on people holding public office. And I wanted the president to have one 6-year term, and he couldn't succeed himself. Because if a president goes 4 years, the first 4 years, everything he does is based on his reelection, not on what's best for the American people.
Hey, I couldn't agree more.
I wanted the senators to have 6-year terms, 2 of them. At the end of your second term, see ya.
Yeah.
All right? Members of the House, we would change it from 2 years to 4 years, and they would have 3 4-year terms. 12 years, see you later.
I love it.
I even got to
I'm running on that.
I even got to the Supreme Court. Nobody should have a job for the rest of their life in the United States of America. Nobody.
That's a good
all right?
point.
And my thing was they would have a 13-year term. At the end of that 13 years, there'd be a different president. So that at the end of that 13 years, the president could reappoint them for another 13, but that would be the end of them, or replace them.
Yeah.
But so I'm ecstatic when I see that one of your thrusts is term limits.
Absolutely, because you're just right. Something's wrong about how broken it is now, and however broken it was in '76 when you were running for president, it's a lot more broken now. I mean, Watergate was a real problem. We all know that, but it was not as deeply structural as it is right now. I mean, it's people have hunkered down just that much more, and nobody works with each other on either side.
No.
And you're right. The degree of entrenchment is just off the charts. We have to shake that up. One way is term limits, and I like. By the way, I like all of your plans. I don't know if I can get all of those done.
No,
but second is no budget, no work, no pay. That's one of the ideas I'm running on too. If you don't do your jobs, Senator Reid didn't, as majority leader, he didn't pass a budget for 6 years. I mean, that's like the first thing you're supposed to do in your job.
Yep.
And so we need to figure out how to get people off the dime to actually be leaning into a process and working with each other.
Well, I mean, you got to look at it. It's a great job. Listen, while you and I are celebrating, saying Happy New Year to each other, they got a raise. They got a law passed that they don't have to vote on their raises anymore. It's automatic on the first of the year, unless they vote not to do it, which of course they get amnesia on that one. And then they get all these benefits, even a complete staff. So all their campaign pals and their best friends get great jobs, and they stay in there forever. Okay? And you got people down there, and please don't take this wrong, but they've been there for 30 and 40 years.
I understand.
They're now in their 80s, and they're passing laws that tell you when you should retire.
The irony is rich, isn't it? Yeah, so I completely agree. We have to do something to shake that up.
But is it possible? It's great for you to do that, and I'm for you 100%. But first of all, you need 60 more people to say yes with you. Would you ever get them to do it? Would they ever vote to cost themselves? I mean, how do you get someone, and their argument is, well, I've got seniority. And you know how many people really care about their seniority? Nobody but them.
I'm not going to argue with you. You and I are on the same page, and
But how do you get them to vote themselves out of office?
Well, I think the way that this ends up working is when the sense of what's broken, it becomes so great, right? And I think the American people, are speaking with a very loud voice right now that something is so fundamentally wrong, and I think it gets to the point of an existential risk for our country that we're so divided, which is why my basic point is, to say, look, I'm tired of the divisiveness, I'm tired of the discord, along with so many of my fellow Americans and fellow citizens in Massachusetts. And I want to run to bring people together. I've done it my entire life. I've brought people together, across partisan divides, across racial divides. And, we're doing it in this campaign, and we're going to do it in Washington. Now, what it takes to get that job done, we'll find out.
Yeah.
But you know what? You never get anything done unless you visualize it and
Right.
start working on it.
See, my fear.
By the way, one more thing, just to add to your hope on this subject. On the subject of term limits, the polling is at something like 85% of all Americans, Republican and Democrat. So, people really want something different.
I mean, it's what it is.
Yes.
I mean, and the problem is, and it's my little saying, the ins protect the ins, and the ins don't want the outs in.
Yeah.
It's the toughest thing in the world to do is to have a congressman who's now sat for 24 years, and someone's going to try to unseat him,
Right.
and he sits with a war chest that's got more money than he'll ever be able to spend, and now the concern becomes, do you buy that election or do you really win them?
Yeah. That's a great point.
But to your point, the American people, at some point in time, are going to have to stand up and say, enough is enough. We're tired of it. And yet they'll go out and they'll vote the same guy in again, and 2 years. See, that's the other problem. You're not in the House, you're running for senator, but the House members, the day they get elected, they start campaigning for re-election.
I know.
It's only 2 years away.
I know.
And that's all they're ever doing is running for office.
Hey, if you and I are going to go deep on political philosophy, then we can also talk about gerrymandering too, and what that's done to the congressional districts.
yeah.
But I suspect your viewers
will
be bored by you and I talking.
But the thing is, that you have so many great ideas, and then the concern is, but can you do them? Like for instance, we have a situation in this country where the price of medication is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, these companies make millions of pills, and some of these medications that you have to take are $200 and $300 and $400.
Yeah.
And yet, I always submit if they stop advertising, and at the end of the advertisement, oh, and by the way, it can also kill you. If you hear their ads, you stop advertising. Number one, stop advertising, save that money, stop buying and wine and dining doctors, and then stop giving money to the politicians. You could cut the cost of pills in half. I mean, you think about it, how much money those companies spend.
Yeah, I obviously you're right on that subject.
And there's something that really affects almost every American.
That is true. That is true.
We're taking some kind of medication.
Yeah, well, that's right. And as our life expectancy gets longer and longer, and
That's right.
and you're, as we talked about offset, you're going to outlive George Burns yourself.
Right. Well, let's talk about the borders, because I know one of your other issue is secure the borders.
Yeah, it's something, it's such a symptom of our broken Washington, that something as straightforward as and broadly agreed to on the right and on the left, except for the far left, that we ought to secure our borders is something which has become controversial. The idea of enhanced border security, securing borders, is something which not in the not too distant past, everybody agreed to, right? It was a bipartisan concept.
Yeah.
Schumer, Obama, others in the Senate of that stripe, used to vote, yeah, of course we're going to build more wall because that's the right thing to do. And now it's become something where it's so controversial that we can't come together as Americans to agree on even the simplest of things. That a sovereign nation gets to decide its borders and define its borders.
Well, here's the thing that troubles me. It's you take someone who's an illegal immigrant and call them an undocumented citizen.
Yeah.
It's like calling a drug pusher an unregistered pharmacist.
Well, there's that. There's that. That's a good line.
I mean, think about it. Think about it.
I'm going to get my team there offset too. I can take that one down. I can see. We're keeping that one in mind.
I'm actually on Twitter right now.
No, but it's true. Think about it.
Yeah.
You know, and they are what they are.
Yeah, no, it's
and they
exactly-
broke the law to get here.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you know, and as your viewers know, you know, to take it one step, you know, further, you know, you get further into the zone of absurdity, right? So then in order to not address that issue, then we have you know, some people saying, well, let's call it a sanctuary city, and not have the federal government not have the law enforcement officials who work for the federal government to take care of immigration and security issues for us,
Right.
not to be able to cooperate with local law enforcement. You know, in what sort of world does it make sense to say, let's suspend the rule of law in a city or town? And then you take it one more turn further, and this is how crazy the left has gotten, like Elizabeth Warren, and she starts talking about abolishing you know, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, the ICE. She says, like, you know, okay, no longer are we going to have the concept of security. Let's just have sanctuary cities, and then, oh yeah, by the way, let's just end the idea of law enforcement entirely at the federal level, and for security purposes. It makes no sense at all.
But John, we're a country of laws. It's what sustained us for 200 and umpteen years.
Yeah.
Okay? We were the model for the world.
That's why it seems all so absurd, doesn't it? I mean, it seems so absurd that we've gone from like a simple concept, we get to decide who comes in and who doesn't come in, and now we're so many turns down the road of arguing about different versions of the same darn point, and it all comes down to, yes, laws matter.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, you know, it just amazes me. Someone asked me recently, I graduated from high school in Malden in 1953. Someone asked me what it was like back then versus today. And I said, well, number one, we were thick as thieves. We all got along. We knew every one of our neighbors. And by the way, if you did something wrong, by the time you got home, your father already knew. He was waiting for you. And I remember that we had a curfew in Malden. At 9 o'clock, they ran the fire whistles. And if you were under 18, you better be home.
Right.
And Tommy Heath was a cop in the square, in Malden Square. And Tommy would walk around, he knew every kid. And he'd walk around and he'd say, he knew where you lived too. And he'd say, Vaughn, you live up in Oak Grove. It's going to take you 10 minutes to get home. It's 8:45. If you don't get going pretty soon, I'm going to take you home in the car. And if I bring you home in that car and bring you to your father, you know what's going to happen to you. And you left the square. If a cop did that today, they'd arrest him.
That's Tommy Heath, you said his name was?
Yeah, back then, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we need more Tommy Heaths out there.
But that's what the police were like back then. Yeah. And you respected them and you got along with them.
Right.
You know,
And
they knew the kids and they knew what they could tell you. And if you gave them any grief, they'd tell your father. But then I said, let me tell you about today. Today's society is two words: rationalization and entitlement. And they said, what do you mean? I says, we in this country can rationalize everything, including murder. And I said, and we walk around and we're entitled. What? What? I mean, I've been working since I was 16 years old. Entitled.
Right.
You know? And so that's the tragedy. And,
Well, I
this is what we've got to work on to get the people back to thinking straight.
The way I think about that is you know, I think about the generation that I'm in, which is a generation or generation and a half after you, and on down after that, and somehow or other, you know, we're taking all the values that you know you and your generation worked to build, and generations before you, of course, and I feel like we're squandering them in this time, right? I mean, we're living with the fruits of prosperity, and you know, the country is prosperous and generally safe, but somehow that type of spirit that you're talking about, you know, not being entitled, for instance, and feeling like the world owes you something. Well, you know, it doesn't. And if we start to believe that, then we're going to be in trouble. We need to go back to the values of your generation.
You know something? I was telling someone. I think one of the things that happened to us is each succeeding generation made this statement: I will never treat my kids the way my mother and father treated me. And that was a big mistake, because my kids were brought up just like my father and mother brought me up. And we learned things. My mother had a sign on the refrigerator till the day she died. And the sign said, we are ultimately responsible for ourselves.
That pretty much covers
know.
that landscape, doesn't it?
Hasn't it really? And unfortunately, that hasn't carried. And each generation has allowed, things to change, and the discipline was not there.
Right.
My dad used to say to me, son, whatever happened to common sense? And we don't have that today in this country.
Well, that's what I'm playing for. And the one subject of Washington, I'm looking for common sense.
Yeah.
Not something
That's
which.
what it is.
I mean, it's just some of this stuff is just I use things like the budget deficit, which
Yeah.
must just drive you crazy. I mean, the $21 trillion debt.
Someone's got to pay for it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's not going to be. I mean, unfortunately, in a way, it's not going to be you. It's not going to be me. And we're passing it down to other people. It's
That's
not
right.
fair. That's part of that values thing. That's part of the fact that my generation ought to hurry up and fix this thing and not hand it down to the next generation.
Well, you got one thing, fight to keep taxes low. Let me share you about Charlton. As a member of the assessors, last year we lowered our tax rate from $14.10 a thousand to $13.50.
You lowered
Okay.
your taxes.
Yes, we did.
How about that?
Because, you see, nobody has ever said that a government knows how to run a government.
Right.
They've proved beyond a reasonable doubt
Right.
they don't know how to do that.
Right.
However, the biggest business in the town of Charlton happens to be the town of Charlton. We have more employees than anybody else. We spend more money than anybody else. We take in more money than anybody else. We have bigger pensions. We have more insurance.
How many employees are there in Charlton?
Off the top of my 300 or 400.
Okay.
But the point is, Massachusetts, the biggest business in the Commonwealth, is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And the biggest business in the United States of America is the government of the United States of America. And I'm thrilled that we need more businessmen involved, because you know how to run a business. You cannot spend what you do not have.
You and I get that, right? You and I get that.
I ran businesses for 60 years, and I used to sign that payroll, and I was one of the last guys that would not let ADT print my name. Every single week, I signed the paychecks.
All right.
I did it for two reasons. Number one, I wanted to remind myself how much they were getting paid.
Yeah, sure.
And number two, I thought it was very important that I took at least 3 seconds to sign my name for every person who worked with me.
No, I like that.
And I signed the payroll every week.
I like
But
that.
that's just me.
No.
But my point to you is let's talk about fighting to keep taxes low,
Well,
because we are an overtaxed society.
Yes, you stated it the right way, right? It's that we as common sense people believe in the how wonderful individual Americans ultimately are. We believe that individual Americans, individual citizens of Massachusetts, are going to do a better job of figuring out how to spend their money in efficient ways than a government. So whenever possible, taxes should be lower rather than higher. That's just the bottom line, right?
But how do you do it, John? How do you convince 60 other guys or gals, and I don't know what, 200 and some odd in the House,
218. But who's counting?
to do that? How do you do that?
Well, we just start
Because
with.
a lot of them get in there with an agenda.
Well, happily, yeah. I mean, look, I agree that it's tough, but I think if we keep our eye on the ball, and we realize that there's a sacred trust between the people in Washington, the people back home, the people who are working hard, and this is where real life's to be found here in Charlton, right? If the people in Washington can not keep their eye on the ball, put their eye back on that ball, I think we can get in touch with that. We'll do things like, reform the functioning. We'll bring people together across partisan lines to get things done. We'll move balance back to our budgets. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. It's been running amok for a long time. It's going to take a while, but we'll at least start doing that. That's because we got to solve problems for the American people, and it does feel a little. I mean, I think the average American is feeling a little dispirited about what's happening and whether it can actually be fixed. So all the questions you're asking are like, can we fix it? Can we fix it? And I'm like, you know what? I know why people feel dispirited about that, but yeah, I think we can, and that's what I'm here to do.
Well, the thing, and you touched on a great thing. I think what's happening, and it's, as somebody who cares a great deal, the thing that really concerns me is the number of people who throw their hands up and say, my vote doesn't matter.
Yep.
They're going to do what they want anyway. What's the point?
Right.
And it starts there. We say, whoa, wait a minute. It does matter.
It does matter. It matters
You know,
a lot.
I mean, you ever say that to my father, and he'd be all over you. Look, I went to 2 world wars, so you could do that.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
you go back to that entitlement point, right?
Yeah.
The idea that we and our parents before us understood that, like, I mean, so many people sacrificed for the
Yeah.
freedom we have.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there comes this spirit that evolves and all of this that people think, well, I'll stay out of the political process.
Yeah.
And it'll all still be okay. Well,
Yeah.
no, you got to be invested in it.
Yeah.
You got to be invested in taking charge for the values you and I care about, and the values that I'm running on, which is, again, not Republican values,
No.
not Democratic values, American values.
Well, that's the bottom line to it. And you go back through history, and you talk about the Everett Dirksons of the world, and even the Ted Kennedys of the world, and people before them. I was telling some folks before, one of my great moments in my life was 1958. I had just started working at WARE. I was an announcer, news guy, news and sports. And a fellow was running for Senate. He was running for re-election against Henry Cabot Lodge. His name was John Kennedy. And he came to Ware, Massachusetts, and spoke on the town hall during the campaign. I had a chance to go down and record his speech, and afterwards chatted with him. And I said to him, I says, Senator, politics is such a tough. He says, well, first of all, politics is a rough and tumble sport. That's number one. But he says, secondly, I love politics because politics is simply the art of compromise. You have to learn to give on the big things to get the little ones.
Right, exactly.
And he says, and if you go to Washington and you work with people and you sit down, and somewhere between what you want and what I want, there's a spot that we both can agree.
John Kennedy said that to you?
Yep.
No kidding.
And he told me a great story. He told me a story that they had the house in Hyannis, and the girls wanted new rugs because they had hardwood floors. And they said, going to have a big meeting. And Mrs. Kennedy said, okay, go ahead. If you want rugs, you guys are all there. So he says, my brothers and we're all there. And he said, we're all deciding. And then Eunice wanted a blue rug. One of them, Jean wanted a pink rug. Somebody else wanted a mauve rug. And we argued and argued and argued. And finally my mother puts her hands up and says, it's decided, there'll be no rug. Since you can't even pick a color.
Right.
And he told me that story. And he says, just think, all we wanted was a rug.
Right.
Did the color really matter?
Right.
Boy, we made it the biggest thing in the world. And he says, and I learned a lesson from that.
That's a
And he
good
says,
story.
It's
That's
the
a
simple,
very good story.
Politics is simply the art of compromise.
That
to
it
be able
is.
to sit down and somewhere between what you want and what I want, there's a place we can agree.
Well, that's what I would try to remind the voters. I'm going to be reminding the voters all the next 90 days till November 6th, is the idea that unlike Elizabeth Warren, people like Ted Kennedy or Tip O'Neill, ideologically, I may not have agreed with them, right? I
No,
did not
that's
agree with them,
okay.
but that's okay. You knew they were working tirelessly for the people of Massachusetts, number one, and number two, they were willing to figure it out and compromise.
The stories are legendary about Tip O'Neill and Ronald
Ronald
Reagan.
Reagan, sure,
They
exactly.
they used to meet at night, and they'd
Exactly.
sit down and they'd bang it out, and they'd come up
Absolutely.
with an agreement and get it done.
There you go,
and get it done.
That's our country, right,
Right.
there in a,
That's
in a
right.
capsule. And right now, Warren is so obstructionist and extremist that there's no room to say, hey, let's get something done
Well,
here.
I happen to have a radio station at one time up in Vermont, and I see this fellow Sanders. Now, he was up in Vermont for a long time. He never accomplished anything up there. Now he's running around, wants to give everybody a free education. Well, wait a minute.
Free education.
Someone's going to pay for it.
And free education and free health care
Wait
from
up.
the government. That's all. Everything's free.
Anyway, well, listen.
You and I both know there's free just means somebody else is
They're
paying
going to pay for that.
Exactly.
Somebody pays for it, no
exactly
matter what
right.
happens.
Exactly.
That's what free means. Listen, we've come to the end of a half hour, but I have to thank you tremendously, number one, for coming out and saying hello.
I enjoyed it very
Number
much.
two, I am very impressed, and I wish you, to get enough votes to get yourself down there, because you bring a new look. You bring a different perspective. And if you can continue to do that, you're going to be very successful.
Well, thank you.
And we need about 90 more of you, you know, 2 from each state.
We got to start someplace,
True
right?
for- yeah, we gotta begin
We're gonna start
here.
right here in Massachusetts.
We'll begin here.
Thank you.
You
very
got it.
much.
John,
Really
thanks a
appreciate it.
bunch.
It's been wonderful to be here.
My
Honored to
pleasure.
be here in front of your viewers.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a bunch. There you have it, folks. That's another Conversations With.